hear Bill Gates talk about population control. We hear other people from the Rockefeller Foundation and Ford Foundation talk about population control. I wanted to know where it started. So uh, this project demonstrates how the population control mechanism got started, who the founders were, and the intersection of the military industrial complex, philanthropy, and academia.
Wow.
And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how all of that came together to create the modern industrialized depopulation programs that exist today.
Unbelievable. Let's dig in.
The great news for me was that there's a book that explains how this organization came together. It's called World Population Crisis, the United States Response by Phyllis Pietro. Uh, it's an amazing book that discusses how this came together. And what you'll notice immediately is that there's a foreword by George H.W. Bush, the US representative to the UN. This was written in 1974. And he goes on to talk about how his awareness of birth control started with his father, who was a part of Planned Parenthood. So immediately you start seeing how these organizations, how connected people were getting all of this together. So I'll jump into the data here to kind of demonstrate what this book looked like.
So for our viewers, this is a map, a visual representation of all of the connections that Andrew's been able to dig up from his research. And this is where it starts to get really interesting. This tool that he has is incredible. It looks like a galaxy, and indeed it is a bit of a galaxy of deceit and treachery, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, whether you believe this is a good thing or not, it's all mapped out. So this is mostly coming from that one book, and the way I have it laid out is in milestones. These are all of the milestones starting from the 1920s way down here, ending in the 1970s over here. And this is a very galaxy view of it. We'll get into the details in a second. These are the milestones in yellow, and back here are all of the organizations and people that help come together to make it happen.
Wow.
And so the higher up they are, the more influential they become. We'll get into that in a second.
It's amazing when you see this because you think about how complicated these types of things must be and the coordination that must happen to achieve the destruction that they have. And then when you see this visual representation of it, it all starts to make sense.
All of his data, by the way, I've collated it so it all has a lot of metadata coming from it, which means I'm able to talk about where it is, a little bit more of the details behind it, where in the book it comes out, passages from the book, chapter numbers, all of that. So, and this is what I do with all of my data. But for today, let's go through this. We start early in the 1930s with Puerto Rico. And there are birth control practices happening through the International Planned Parenthood, which has just started at this moment in time. Now, I'm going to go real quick and show you what that International Planned Parenthood looked like. This is a map of the development of International Planned Parenthood, where it started and where it ended up going to. And these are all of the layers of different organizations that it turned into over time, how it jumped from one organization to another. So you'll see it started with the American Birth Control League, the Birth Control Federation of America. And we can see very early on, I'm not going to show you anybody else, but it'll show you how influential some of these people who are connected in those chains. These are people working high up in the board level, help develop those programs. Here you have Corolla, Warburg, Rothschild. And you can see, and there are many other influential people, socialites, and very, very rich industrialists who are part of these organizations who sit on these boards, eventually becoming International Planned Parenthood.
Can I
So
ask you, Andrew,
sure.
when you pull out that Rothschild connection, does that mean that they're all ultimately connected to that Corolla Rothschild?
They're connected to Rothschild through the Birth Control Federation of
Right.
America. So all of these people sat on the board or served in some high capacity with Corolla Rothschild at that point in time. And you
Right.
can see some of these individuals sat on multiple boards. Here's Margaret Sanger, who was a part of all of them. So back in the 1930s, around when this is, they were already committed to doing birth control studies and birth control methodologies and experiments in different locations. So it started in Puerto Rico. Um, by the 1950s, uh, other organizations are starting to get involved, particularly the UN. Now you can see this is still very vacant. There's not a lot happening at this point in time, but the UN is putting out demographic yearbooks and they're doing studies. John Rockefeller has done an Asia study report, and the China Planning Association, which ultimately turned into the two child policy, starts to be put in place. By 1955, things start picking up. You see there's a little bit more activity. The UN has created a population division. And at this point in time, you have transitions through these UN leadership teams. Oral contraceptives start being used publicly, and this starts to become a big thing. Contraceptives start becoming part of the vernacular and start being implemented through some of these programs. A really interesting thing happens. We're in post war. Eisenhower is president, and he decides, and he's talked into putting together a committee to understand a lot of these issues that happen. And so, what was created, particularly looking at the population issue, was something called the Draper Committee. Draper, I'm going to show you who that Draper, who is part of the Draper Committee. So this is the Draper Committee. The Draper Committee is put together to talk about how to, in a post-World War II, post-Marshall Plan world, how does U.S. Have to do with the rest of the world, especially when it comes to Soviet influence and expansion at a global scale? The Marshall Plan was just put in place, and some of these individuals who are these nodes, these major nodes, come together. These are people who are industrialists, are high-ranking military officials, are part of Skull and Bones, and you can see some of them are very influential. You have William Henry Draper, who was the key member of that report. He was a member of Skull and Bones. He owned and was managing a steel company. You have other people who started the operation of, the OSS,
Mm-hmm.
and so were part of the Rockefeller Foundation, the Atlantic Institution, and you also have members of the Council on Foreign Relations who are part of this, a couple of members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And this is back in the 1950s. So all of
You know
these,
what's fascinating to me? Sorry if I can just pause
yeah,
you. The fact that
sure.
the Atlantic Council, Council on Foreign Relations, all these organizations involved with this going back decades are still in place today. They haven't gone anywhere. These are still problematic to us today.
Yeah, and not only that, you can see some other organizations that people would agree with, the Monsanto Chemical Corporations, the Brookings Institutions. This is the military industrial complex. People who were a part of NATO. You can't get much more central to the mechanisms of the military industrial complex than these individuals who were coming together, who are also, while they are part of military institutions, were also part of International Planned Parenthood and the
Wow.
Population Crisis Committee. So early on, you see, when we think about, I think most people think about Planned Parenthood as a benevolent organization that's here to help women with birth control. What's actually happening is that this is an organization primarily to serve US hegemony and to institute domination and control over the population of the planet. This is a eugenics society. And you can see very early on that there is no separation between the military industrial complex and what would ultimately become the Planned Parenthood that we know.
We want
At this point in time, Eisenhower and Kennedy are completely against all of this population control stuff. They don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And by the way, Eisenhower says don't do anything with population control, don't do anything with contraceptives overseas. And USAID and other members of that organization defy him and secretly continue on with it. So when we talk about Eisenhower's issue with the military industrial complex, this clearly could have been one of those moments where he said, this is getting out of control. Because while Eisenhower said no, This is, let's see where we are right now, 1968. So we're Eisenhower's back here. Let's rewind. Kennedy is president here, but this is where people are sneaking behind his back. People, uh, Draper is, so by the way, this is where we get into Eisenhower and Kennedy being completely against this. Draper meeting with Eisenhower, and suddenly, after Eisenhower meets with Draper, he reverses his decision and joins Planned Parenthood.
Wow.
Now, Kennedy never got to join Planned Parenthood,
So
but
hang on,
I,
he's against this. He's saying we don't want to do this.
mhm.
These programs are happening, in secret. And then what convinces him to flip?
Well, uh, all we know is that Eisenhower met. There's foreign aid being signed into law. We have people meeting with him. Uh, Draper is meeting with Kennedy. There are people meeting behind the scenes. Richard Nixon is a part of it too. He's not president yet. There's just a lot of political pressure happening in this moment in time. Here, this starts to ramp. You can see here, this starts to ramp up in the 1970s. Really, USAID is ramping up at this point in time. They have major research expansion. There's a lot of literature that I've adjusted for, and I have in other graphs that I'll show in the near future on my channel. But what we see here is that USAID is getting so much, the population program is getting so much funding, they don't know what to do with it. But it is organized by a man named Ravenholt, who is the quintessential mad scientist, because Ravenholt, which is not in this graph, but I'll show again in my audience on Twitter, uh, he has been doing mad scientist projects for years, and he somehow manages to find his way as the chief person on the USAID population program. So, as an example, one of the things that he did back in the 1950s was that he figured out a way to split a zygote naturally in a rabbit, or split an egg naturally in a rabbit, which meant that he was able to create life without fertilization. Uh, this was something that could still be done today. This is cloning without cloning.
Well, they are
So
doing it today.
they are,
They are, yes.
but this is literally just taking an egg and forcing it into reproducing by itself with no other chemical or no other injection of any alternative DNA. So,
Right.
you know, this is the type of person who gets into this program. And by the way, if you read his writings, he doesn't care about women's rights at all. All of his writing is about population control. And so, what you'll see, and what I'll demonstrate on my channel later, is that every major contraceptive that gets put on the market from hereafter is funded by USAID in some major part. So the whole movement, whether it's IUDs, female contraceptives, condom technology, is funded by USAID. I'm not going to show that here, but it is a part of that program. So we're getting to the end here. This is the end of the book. We're around 1972. Everything is going according to plan. And here gets involved some really interesting people. We have Nixon, who's in power. There's a lot happening behind the scenes I won't get into because it gets very political. There's a lot of Catholics who are not happy with it, and there's a conversation whether abortion should be a part of this. There are laws that have been passed, like Title X, but what's really interesting is what happens next really brings us forward in momentum to what we might recognize today.
Because I mean, it hasn't gone anywhere. We're still on the trajectory of population control. I'm wondering what it looks like today, given so many people have woken up to vaccines, climate change, all these agendas. What does it actually look like today?
Yeah. And gets really interesting because at this moment in time, Henry Kissinger uh, puts out a memo called NSSM, National Security Study Memorandum 200. And in this, he directs from defense all the way to the CIA and to USAID to direct a study of the impact of world population growth. So the US oversees, the study should look forward at least to the year 2000 and use several alternative reasonable projections of population growth. What I think that means, and what I see from the data that comes after this is the world's first surveillance program put
Wow.
across the planet. So, in the name of population control, Henry Kissinger sees an opportunity because people are inviting USAID and other organizations into their bedroom. Now we can get a look into nations all the way down to that level. So when we talk about how much power and information is in it, and by the way, this is the first major government program and the first surveillance program that uses computers at a mass scale.
So look at the coordination there between all these organizations and Kissinger.
Yeah.
And I mean, who in the 1970s would have thought that they're being put under the world's first mass surveillance program in order to depopulate? Who
Yeah.
would have
And
really been aware of that back then?
yeah. And so we see here too is this data starts coming in and they are using computers to start parsing data at a massive scale. And you see from USAID and USAID sponsored reports uh, projections of birth rates across the planet. They start putting out international fertility research program studies, uh, international fertility research programs. And what this is here to do is to set off this very, very first spring into action around the development of contraceptives at large. So again,
Can you just go back up, Andrew, please, to the
sure, absolutely.
amounts? So we're talking about, which year is this?
This is 1976.
And where
So you can see at that moment in time the cost for development of fertility drugs and fertility. This is for research and development is $51 million.
in
76.
1976,
Yeah.
$51 million in 1976 was a colossal amount of money.
Well, it is spread out across multiple years, so you can see how it was. This was the prior years, and you can see in '76 they were at $3,000. They're asking for a 2x increase, and
Wow.
this is going all the way to 1981. So that's $51 million would be spread out.
It is still an incredible amount of money in that time. And, you know, you would have been ridiculously wealthy in that time period with those kinds of funds. And to think that all of this taxpayer money was going towards that, like it still is today, taxpayer money going to things that just should not be going to. It is incredible to see how long this has been going on.
Yeah. So this brings us to today. And I'll leave you with a little bit of a black hole in the data for the sake of not getting into a very, very large story around population control and keeping this concise. But this is the spending of population. So the USAID Population Office changed its name because population doesn't sound good anymore. We really
Uh-huh.
have to keep it clean. This is the Family Planning Office, and the Family Planning Office uh, gave a lot of money out to organizations for family planning. And so what I've mapped is every expenditure from 1999 to 2018, I believe this is, and all of the countries, you can see them listed here, that received that money. So this all goes globally. I didn't map it out. I
And this
just want
is
to
just so people understand, this is being funded by American taxpayers.